A 911 call came in, calm but urgent. On the line were several young adults, clearly shaken but composed. They explained that their friend, a dependable college student known for her routine morning runs, hadn't returned. Her phone's location hadn't changed for hours, and just moments ago, one of them had come across a personal belonging of hers left in an odd and concerning spot. Something was wrong, and they knew it. Within minutes, local law enforcement launched a coordinated response. Officers were dispatched to various parts of the area surrounding the university campus, focusing especially on the wooded trails frequented by joggers. Officer Kenneth Maxwell, who had been assigned to sweep the section of forest just east of the intramural fields, was the one to make the discovery. Carefully navigating through the underbrush, he noticed something that made him pause. He found the young woman the entire community had been hoping to find safe, Laken Riley. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Laken Hope. Riley was born on January 10, 2002, in the vibrant community of Marietta, Georgia. Raised by her parents, Jason Riley and Allison Phillips, Laken was part of a close-knit family that included 3 siblings. From an early age, she displayed an energetic, compassionate spirit and a strong sense of empathy, qualities that would come to define her both academically and personally. Her upbringing was marked by warmth, support, and a household that valued education, determination, and kindness toward others. She attended River Ridge High School in Woodstock, Georgia, graduating in the year 2020. During her high school years, Laken was not just an exemplary student. She was also deeply involved in extracurricular activities, particularly athletics. As a dedicated member of the cross-country team, she developed not only physical endurance but also a mental resilience that shaped her disciplined lifestyle. Her enthusiasm for running wasn't just a hobby. It was a reflection of her focus on health, wellness, and goal setting. Following her graduation, Laken enrolled at the University of Georgia, where she began her undergraduate studies. It was here that her passion for healthcare began to take clearer form. Driven by a sincere desire to make a difference in people's lives, she later made the decision to transfer to Augusta University to pursue a nursing degree, a step that marked the beginning of her professional journey into the medical field. At Augusta University, Laken distinguished herself through her academic dedication and compassionate nature. Her commitment to nursing wasn't just about career prospects. It stemmed from a genuine concern for the well-being of others. In August 2023, she reached a meaningful milestone when she was awarded her honorary white coat. This symbolic garment represented more than a rite of passage. It was a celebration of her ethical commitment to empathy, integrity, and humanistic care in the world of medicine. Described by family and friends as a radiant, kind-hearted young woman, Laken was admired for her infectious smile and generous spirit. She was a beloved daughter, a dependable sister, and a loyal friend. Those who knew her best spoke of her strong work ethic, her zest for life, and the big dreams she carried for the future. Laken was someone who inspired others through her actions, and she had all the qualities of someone who would have gone on to lead a meaningful and impactful life in service of others. February 22, 2024, began like many other days for 22-year-old Laken. Still attending the University of Georgia in Athens as part of her academic path, she was continuing her nursing studies with focus and optimism. That morning, she followed one of her well-established routines, going out for a morning jog. A regular runner who thrived on staying active, Laken frequently jogged along a familiar trail near campus. This wasn't out of the ordinary for her at all. In fact, it was something she looked forward to, part of her lifestyle that helped her maintain both mental clarity and physical strength. At exactly 8:55 a.m., she sent a lighthearted message to her mother, Allison. "Good morning. About to go for a run. If you're free to talk." Her tone was warm and familiar, the kind that comes from frequent and loving communication. She was dressed in her usual workout attire, prepared for her daily jog, a routine she rarely deviated from. Security footage from the entrance of her shared rental home captured her stepping out, earbuds in, a soft smile on her face, and her posture reflecting confidence and discipline. Laken lived in a well-established neighborhood near the University of Georgia, where she was enrolled in a health sciences program. The house she shared with several other female students was known to be safe, clean, and filled with a spirit of mutual support. The running path she favored was popular among students and locals alike, weaving through a scenic area near the university's intramural fields. For someone like Laken, who valued routine and physical wellness, this path had become almost sacred ground, a place of focus, reflection, and consistency. She had jogged that same trail many times without incident. Friends, professors, and her family all described her as responsible, deeply organized, and cautious by nature. Her mother, familiar with her daughter's habits, didn't find anything unusual when she first saw the text message. But when she called her daughter at around 9:24 a.m. and the call went unanswered, she dismissed her worry at first. It wasn't uncommon for Laken to ignore a call mid-run, either out of courtesy or because she didn't hear it. Nevertheless, just 14 minutes later, Allison sent a brief follow-up. "Call me when you can." Time passed, and as the minutes ticked by without any response, the sense of unease grew stronger. At 9:58 a.m., Allison sent another message, this time edged with maternal concern. "You're making me nervous, not answering when you're out running. Are you okay?" Laken's reliability made even a short period of silence seem strange. By mid-morning, her mother and stepfather had made multiple attempts to reach her, each more urgent than the last. Laken's sister also began calling. None of them received an answer. For a family so close and so in tune with each other's routines, the prolonged silence was no longer just worrisome. It was alarming. Back at the house, Laken's roommates had also noticed the time. Her usual run typically lasted no more than 45 minutes, an hour at most. By late morning, her continued absence was enough to prompt action. With growing concern, they opened the Find My Friends app to check her phone's location. What they found was deeply unsettling. The device hadn't moved in over an hour. Multiple texts and calls from them went unreturned. Now genuinely worried, the roommates decided to act. At approximately 11:31 a.m., a group of them left the house, hoping to find her safe and perhaps just distracted. They retraced what they believed was her regular route, moving quickly but trying to stay calm. The path was quiet, the morning sun high in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. As they approached a wooded section near the edge of the campus, they spread out slightly, scanning the area. Then came a chilling discovery. At approximately 11:46 a.m., one of Laken's AirPods was spotted on the ground beside the path. It was slightly buried under leaves and dirt, as if it had fallen during motion. Though the item itself was small, the implications were massive. For the group of friends, the presence of a personal item in such a location was more than just strange. It was distressing. They quickly gathered, exchanged worried glances, and realized it was time to alert the authorities. At 12 p.m., a 911 call was placed. The friends calmly but urgently explained the situation. A responsible student had failed to return from her morning jog. Her phone hadn't moved in hours, and now a personal item was found in an unusual location. Within minutes, law enforcement was mobilized. The University of Georgia Police Department responded with commendable speed and coordination. Recognizing that every moment counted in a potential missing person situation, officers began sweeping the area surrounding the jogging trail. Patrol units and campus security were dispatched, and specialized officers began searching the more secluded and wooded regions nearby. At 12:38 p.m., a mere 38 minutes after the call was received, the search came to an abrupt and tragic conclusion. Officer Kenneth Maxwell, who had been assigned to sweep the section of forest just east of the intramural fields, was the one to make the discovery. Carefully navigating through the underbrush, he noticed something that made him pause. He found the young woman the entire community had been hoping to find safe. Laken Riley. Though details from the scene were handled respectfully and with professional discretion, law enforcement confirmed that Laken was found, and her condition required immediate involvement from investigative personnel. Her discovery came just 11 minutes after officers had reached the area, a testament to their urgency, but also a somber indication that time had already run out. Investigators secured the scene and began a methodical search for any signs of what might have occurred. While the official reports would take time to finalize, it was immediately clear that this was not a case of someone simply getting lost or injured on a run. Something had gone terribly wrong. Once the tragic discovery was confirmed, campus officers acted swiftly to notify all relevant law enforcement agencies, including the Athens-Clarke County Police Department and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Within a short time, the heartbreaking news began reaching those closest to Laken. Her friends, who had helped launch the initial search effort that morning, and her family, who had grown increasingly worried after hours of unanswered texts and calls, were informed of the devastating update. By the evening hours, news of Laken Riley's passing had begun to spread beyond the campus and the local Athens community. Across the state and soon across the country, people who had never met Laken were learning her name and hearing her story. A promising nursing student, full of life, with a passion for health and service, was now the focus of a criminal investigation. And even though only a few hours had passed since her disappearance was first reported, law enforcement was already piecing together a timeline and uncovering critical evidence. Authorities didn't hesitate for a moment. The moment the case was classified as a high-priority situation, multiple law enforcement agencies mobilized resources without delay. Investigators immediately began pulling data from all available sources: city surveillance footage, interviews with anyone who might have had contact with the victim, as well as comprehensive analysis of phone records and digital communications. By the time the sun had dipped below the horizon, the police had already gathered a handful of leads that investigators considered worth pursuing. Still, they knew from years of experience that early promise meant little if not backed by thorough investigation. In cases like this, cases that had the potential to turn tragic, there was no room for error, no stone that could be left unturned. Every minute was valuable, and every minor detail might carry unexpected weight. In addition to following standard procedures, the investigative team decided to expand their physical search well beyond the immediate vicinity of the last known location. They broadened the search radius to encompass areas often overlooked in routine sweeps. These included seldom-used alleys, secluded green spaces, underpasses, and even local waste disposal sites near student housing complexes. One such location that drew interest was the area around the Aulick apartment complex, which sat just off campus and was heavily populated with university students. That evening, under growing pressure and in response to the widening investigation, a uniformed officer was dispatched to check several dumpsters positioned behind the Aulick complex. Though it may have seemed like a tedious or even unlikely place to find anything of significance, the decision would soon prove critical. The officer, methodical in his search, began lifting trash bags and scanning the contents layer by layer. It was during this process that he noticed something unusual, an item partially concealed under a pile of discarded cardboard and fast food packaging. It was a black jacket, seemingly nondescript at first glance. But when he lifted it for closer inspection, a different picture began to emerge. Though slightly wrinkled and weathered, the jacket bore marks that instantly raised alarm. Faint but visible biological stains were present on several parts of the fabric, enough to suggest the potential for DNA. More disturbingly, a long, dark strand of hair was found wrapped around one of the front buttons. The officer, trained to recognize evidence that could easily be overlooked, did not waste a second. He photographed the scene, secured the jacket using proper evidence handling protocols, and immediately notified the on-site detectives. What might have appeared to some as a discarded piece of clothing was now being treated as potentially pivotal evidence in an unfolding case. The manner in which the jacket was hidden, deliberately tucked beneath refuse, strongly indicated that someone didn't want it found. In the context of a case involving a missing person who had recently been located under circumstances authorities were treating as highly suspicious, this seemingly minor discovery took on profound importance. Investigators quickly realized that the black jacket might not only be linked to the victim, it could be the first tangible connection to whoever was involved. While the forensic team began examining the jacket off-site, the core investigative unit continued canvassing the neighborhood. During these rounds, they made another critical observation. A resident who lived in an apartment just across from the dumpster had a doorbell camera installed. Its angle and position gave it a direct line of sight to the area where the jacket had been discovered. Detectives knocked on the door and respectfully requested access to the footage. The resident, cooperative and visibly concerned by the growing police presence, agreed without hesitation. The video turned out to be a major breakthrough. As the team reviewed the footage frame by frame, one segment in particular stood out. At precisely 9:43 a.m., a man appeared on screen. He moved cautiously, frequently glancing over his shoulder, and carried something dark in his arms. He then opened the dumpster, placed the item inside, and walked away in a hurried but restrained manner. That item was quickly identified as the same jacket recovered earlier. But what truly elevated the importance of this discovery was what came next. Upon closer analysis, the detectives realized that the man's appearance matched that of an individual seen earlier in the morning on surveillance footage captured several blocks away. The timestamp and locations aligned almost perfectly. The suspect's clothing, posture, and general build were all consistent with a person flagged earlier as of interest. With this visual confirmation, the case evolved from a missing persons inquiry into something more serious. A new direction was forming, one that now carried the unmistakable signs of a criminal act. Attention immediately shifted to reconstructing the timeline in detail. At 8:55 a.m. on the morning of February 22nd, Laken, the 22-year-old university student at the center of the investigation, had sent her mother a short but routine text message. She was heading out for her morning run, just like she did almost every day. Moments later, a doorbell camera installed at her residence captured her leaving the house, dressed in athletic wear, earbuds in place, and her phone in her left hand. By 9 a.m., another residential camera, this one positioned along her running route, recorded her jogging at a steady pace. That clip was one of the last confirmed images of Laken before things took a turn. Then came an unsettling detail that shifted the urgency of the case. At 9:28 a.m., less than half an hour after she was last seen, a call was placed from Laken's phone to emergency services. But the call didn't last more than a few seconds. The dispatcher who received it described hearing only background noise before the line abruptly disconnected. 2 immediate attempts to call the number back went unanswered. Despite the brevity of the call, it became a focal point of the investigation. It suggested that in the moments leading up to whatever happened, Laken may have attempted to seek help. Investigators continued pursuing leads along the trail she was known to frequent. Teams interviewed joggers, local maintenance workers, and nearby residents. No detail was dismissed. Meanwhile, forensic analysts combed the scene, gathering material that could link a suspect to the timeline. Among the items collected were a pair of gloves, torn fragments of fabric caught on nearby brush, and several biological samples taken from surrounding surfaces. Each item was logged and analyzed with precision. Lab results began to roll in. One particularly telling discovery came from beneath Laken's fingernails, trace amounts of DNA that didn't belong to her. This evidence, combined with biological samples found on the gloves and black jacket, began to paint a picture. Each test result brought them closer to connecting physical evidence to a living suspect. The forensic examination was meticulous. Scientists in the crime lab compared the hair found twisted around the jacket's button with a sample from Laken's hairbrush provided by the family. The match was confirmed. Even more conclusively, the DNA retrieved from the gloves and jacket was also verified to belong to Laken, providing a direct connection between her and the article of clothing dropped in the dumpster. The video trail didn't end there. A second camera, located a few blocks away, captured the same man walking past the dumpster again at 10:21 a.m., this time without the jacket. 3 minutes later, the camera caught him returning, and this time, he no longer appeared to be carrying a bag he had previously had in his possession. These timestamps and movement patterns gave detectives a narrowed window of activity, strengthening the profile of the man they now regarded as a person of significant interest. Though they had video, clothing, and forensic evidence, the individual's identity remained a mystery, at least initially. In response, authorities acted quickly. Law enforcement and university officials released still images from the surveillance footage to the public, urging anyone with knowledge of the individual to come forward. The photos circulated rapidly across social media platforms, news outlets, and community bulletin boards. And soon enough, the tips began pouring in. Multiple people recognized the man in the images, and several named the same individual, Jose Antonio Ibarra. When detectives reviewed Ibarra's background and appearance, they realized he bore a striking resemblance to the man from the footage. The details lined up. His build, his gait, his hairstyle, even the clothing he had been seen wearing in public around the time of the incident. With a name, a profile, and mounting evidence, authorities were finally closing in on a suspect who they believed held the answers to what happened that day. But there were still many questions left to be answered. How did their paths cross? Was this random or intentional? And most importantly, what led to such a tragic outcome? It wasn't just the uncanny physical resemblance or his proximity to the location where crucial evidence had been discovered. It was also his past, which revealed a troubling pattern of behavior. The man identified in surveillance footage not only lived right near the dumpster where the black jacket had been found, but also matched the description perfectly. And as investigators dug deeper, they quickly learned that he was not exactly a model citizen. His name was Jose Antonio Ibarra, a 26-year-old man originally from Venezuela. Official records showed that Jose had entered the United States unlawfully on September 8, 2022. Border agents from U.S. Customs and Border Protection first encountered him shortly after he crossed into the country near El Paso, Texas, part of the nation's heavily patrolled southern border. After being processed, he was paroled and released, pending further immigration proceedings, a policy designed to manage intake when detention resources are limited. Initially, Jose stayed at a migrant shelter, a common first stop for many individuals navigating the complex and often uncertain path of asylum or undocumented residence. But his time at the shelter was short-lived. Soon, he began moving from state to state, eventually making his way to New York City, where he encountered law enforcement once again. On September 14, 2023, just over a year after entering the U.S., New York Police Department officers arrested Jose Ibarra. He was charged with driving violation. Although the charges were filed, Jose was released before federal immigration officials could issue a detainer. This meant he was allowed to remain free and continued his movement across the country, ultimately settling in Georgia, where he would later become the focus of a much darker investigation. Jose wasn't alone when he relocated to Georgia. He moved into an apartment complex with his older brother, Diego Ibarra, who was 29 years old at the time. Like his younger sibling, Diego had his own share of red flags. Court documents later revealed that Diego had obtained a fraudulent green card, which he used to gain employment at the University of Georgia, the very campus Laken Riley had called home. Even more concerning were the details that emerged about Diego's background. Prosecutors alleged that he had connections to Venezuelan gang, and the evidence to support that suspicion was substantial. Photographs found on social media showed Diego flashing signs and symbols, wearing colors and clothing associated with the group, and even displaying tattoos that investigators considered gang identifiers. Other photos showed Diego posing with guns, a direct violation of U.S. law given his undocumented status. Meanwhile, Jose Ibarra was also on the radar of local authorities in Georgia. Prior to the incident involving Laken Riley, Jose had already faced legal trouble in the state. He had been arrested for shoplifting at a Walmart, a case for which he was awaiting trial. But in December 2023, a warrant was issued for his arrest after he failed to show up in court. This, combined with the disturbing evidence found in the dumpster and the timeline of events that placed him at the scene, rapidly elevated him from a person of interest to a prime suspect. Forensic experts and investigators continued their thorough analysis of both digital and physical evidence. Among the most compelling pieces was cell phone data that placed Jose Ibarra in close proximity to the area where Laken Riley's was discovered. Investigators could find no known connection between Laken and Jose. According to University of Georgia Police Chief Jeff Clark, this was likely a crime of opportunity. He saw an individual, and bad things happened, Chief Clark stated during a press conference. Armed with this growing body of evidence, law enforcement prepared to confront Jose directly. The following day, officers arrived at the apartment complex where Jose lived. Body cameras recorded every moment as officers approached the unit. From the moment they knocked on the window, it was clear that something was off. Jose appeared to be asleep inside, and when he was finally woken up, officers noted a language barrier. Neither he nor his brother seemed to speak English fluently. Recognizing the need for accurate communication, especially given the severity of the situation, officers called in a Spanish-speaking officer to assist with the interview. Once communication was established, officers began asking Jose a series of standard questions. It was during this exchange that they noticed something odd: visible scratches on his arms and neck. When asked about the injuries, Jose offered a vague explanation, claiming they were due to the cold and that they were just scratches. But the officers knew better. In the context of what had occurred, these marks took on a far more serious meaning. After corroborating his proximity to the crime scene with surveillance footage, physical evidence, and his injuries, officers made the decision to arrest him. Jose Ibarra was officially taken into custody and charged with multiple serious offenses: 1 count of malice murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of tampering with evidence. In the aftermath of these charges, another disturbing detail came to light. On the same morning as Laken Riley's disappearance, Jose had allegedly been seen looking through the window of a university dormitory, which prosecutors later cited as part of the overall behavioral pattern and as the basis for an additional charge. Laken Riley's funeral was held on March 1, 2024, surrounded by family, friends, classmates, and members of the community whose lives she had touched. The service was a somber yet powerful tribute to a young woman remembered not for how her life ended, but for how she lived, with kindness, purpose, and light. Her loved ones, understandably, refrained from speaking to the media, wanting to preserve her memory in peace. As the case gained national attention amid the uproar and public debate, those who knew Laken best continued to mourn her privately, sparing her memory from the headlines that threatened to reduce her life to a single moment. The lead pastor who presided over her service, Simmer Mad, shared a written message with the press. When the world loses someone like Laken, whose light consistently shines so bright, it seems that much darker in their absence. Those words echoed in the hearts of many who came to know her name after the tragedy. Laken was special, he added, his voice marked with quiet grief. She was a gift to anyone who knew her. Smart, kind, compassionate, and thoughtful. That description doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. She was the kind of person who made you feel safe just by being near her. A truly loving daughter, devoted sister, and a fiercely loyal friend. She had this rare ability to make anyone around her feel seen, heard, and valued. Near the trail where Laken had gone for her final morning run, a small but poignant tribute appeared. On the shores of Lake Herrick, someone had gently altered a wooden sign, changing Lake to Laken using strips of black tape. It was a quiet, touching gesture that showed just how deeply she had touched the hearts of those around her. As the investigation pressed forward, the legal process against Jose Antonio Ibarra began to unfold. On May 8, 2024, he was formally indicted on 10 criminal counts, including murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Due to the severity of the accusations and the weight of the evidence, bail was denied. Initially, a jury trial was scheduled for November 13th, with jury selection to commence that day. But at a pre-trial hearing, Ibarra made an unexpected move. He waived his right to a jury trial, instead opting for a bench trial, in which the verdict would be rendered solely by a judge. That decision raised eyebrows across legal circles, but it was his right to make. During that hearing, members of Laken Riley's family were present in the courtroom. The grief was visible. Emotions ran high, especially when her mother, Allison Phillips, took the stand to deliver a powerful victim impact statement. Speaking directly to Judge Patrick Haggard, Allison implored him to show no leniency when considering the sentencing of the man. She described her daughter not only as intelligent, hardworking, and kind, but also as someone who had been raised with strong values and a deep sense of faith. Laken, Allison said, was a child of God. She had gone on mission trips and volunteered her time in nursing homes, spending countless hours offering care and companionship to elderly residents. She lived to serve, Allison shared, and she would have spent her life helping others. The trial began on Friday, November 15, in a courtroom packed with observers. Tension filled the air. Jose Ibarra's defense team came out with a strategy focused on reasonable doubt. They argued that the case was circumstantial, heavily driven by emotion, and lacking the definitive proof necessary for a murder conviction. They filed multiple motions to exclude pieces of evidence and even attempted to change the venue of the trial, suggesting that local publicity had made a fair trial impossible in Athens. Each of those motions was denied. Defense attorney Dustin Kirby opened by acknowledging the tragedy of Laken Riley's death, but argued that the evidence presented by the state was not sufficient to support a conviction. He questioned the integrity of the forensic claims and even pointed out a potential inconsistency. If Jose had been wearing gloves, he argued, how could his fingerprints have ended up on Laken's phone? But prosecutors, led by Sheila Ross, countered with a case that was built meticulously, supported by both forensic and digital evidence. They presented a series of findings that tied Ibarra to the scene and to the victim directly. Most notably, they revealed that Jose Ibarra's fingerprint was found on the screen of Laken's phone. A significant point given that the phone had been found near the scene and had not been touched by anyone else. These items, together with cell phone location data, surveillance footage, and physical evidence, painted a clear and disturbing timeline. The emotional toll of the trial was especially visible on Laken's family. Throughout the proceedings, her mother Allison had to step out of the courtroom multiple times, overwhelmed by the details being discussed. Each witness, each exhibit, each minute of testimony was a reminder of a future that had been stolen. Finally, on November 20th, 2024, Judge Patrick Haggard delivered the verdict. He found Jose Antonio Ibarra guilty on all counts, including malice murder, felony murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. The sentencing was swift and decisive. Judge Haggard ordered life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition, he imposed a second life sentence, along with 27 additional years, all to be served consecutively. This meant that Ibarra would never again walk free, a judgment that aligned with the wishes of the Riley family and the broader community. In a statement following the conclusion of the trial, District Attorney Deborah Gonzalez addressed the public with words of both strength and empathy. Today, the integrity of our judicial process and the pursuit of justice prevailed, she said. No sentence can undo the harm caused by Jose Ibarra's actions. But we hope that this outcome brings a measure of justice to Laken's family and to a community that has suffered so much. Our hearts remain with Laken's family and friends as they continue to grieve this tragic loss. On the afternoon of January 31, a distressing call was received by emergency services. The caller, a man whose identity has been kept confidential for his protection, reported finding 2 abandoned suitcases. Fearing for his safety, he made no attempt to move or open them. Law enforcement responded promptly. Police officers, accompanied by bomb squad personnel and forensic specialists, quickly secured the area. Treating the situation with extreme caution, they conducted a thorough inspection of the suitcases. After confirming that there was no danger of explosives, the investigators proceeded to open them. What they found inside was deeply horrifying. Although the contents could not be immediately identified, investigators contacted the family of Pamela. Her parents, Alessandra and Stefano, were asked to come to assist with a preliminary identification. In what would become one of the most devastating moments of their lives, they confirmed their worst fear. It was Pamela Mastropietro. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. In this documentary, we investigate a true crime case involving Pamela Mastropietro. She was born on August 23, 1999, in the historic and vibrant city of Rome, Italy. She was the only daughter of Alessandra Berni and Stefano Mastropietro, both of whom came from respected families and were considered pillars of their local business community. Her parents, highly educated and ambitious, had worked hard to build a stable and prosperous life. They owned a flourishing enterprise that afforded them a comfortable lifestyle, and they made sure that Pamela never wanted for material things. She lived in a well-furnished home, wore designer clothes, and had access to excellent schools and private tutors. But even the most luxurious surroundings can sometimes conceal the invisible weight of emotional absence. Despite their love for her, the realities of Alessandra and Stefano's professional obligations meant they were often absent from home, preoccupied with their ever-demanding schedules. Family meals were infrequent, and meaningful conversations even rarer. While they strived to make up for lost time during holidays and vacations, Pamela often felt the emotional void left by their absence, though she couldn't always articulate it as a child. From an early age, Pamela exhibited certain idiosyncrasies that hinted at deeper emotional complexities. She was notably introverted, avoiding eye contact and preferring solitude over playdates or group activities. While some parents might have seen these as early warning signs, Alessandra and Stefano were hopeful, perhaps even optimistic, that their daughter's shyness would diminish with age and exposure to social environments. They encouraged her to join extracurricular activities, from ballet classes to piano lessons, hoping these would spark a change. But the underlying disquiet remained, subtly deepening as the years progressed. As Pamela entered her primary school years, her emotional struggles became more apparent. Teachers noted her academic potential. She had a sharp memory and an eye for detail, but she was noticeably withdrawn. She rarely raised her hand in class, and group assignments often left her feeling overwhelmed. Socially, she remained on the margins, often seen sitting alone during recess, staring off into the distance, or writing in a small notebook she carried everywhere. Her teachers expressed concern during parent-teacher meetings, and soon the conversation shifted from academics to emotional well-being. By the time she reached adolescence, the psychological toll was unmistakable. Pamela began experiencing severe bouts of anxiety, often leading to panic attacks at night. Sleep became elusive, and her once orderly routine unraveled. She developed irrational fears of abandonment, of being watched, of failing in ways that were not even clearly defined. After multiple consultations with mental health professionals, she was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a complex condition characterized by intense emotional instability, difficulty forming stable relationships, and a fragmented sense of self. As Pamela grew older, these challenges intensified. Her relationships, even casual ones, were often marked by emotional turbulence. She oscillated between deep attachment and complete detachment, unable to consistently trust others or evaluate social situations with clarity. While many teenagers experiment and push boundaries, Pamela's inability to gauge risks made her especially susceptible to manipulation by individuals with exploitative intentions. At the age of 11, another destabilizing event shook the foundations of her already fragile world. Her parents' marriage began to unravel. Alessandra and Stefano's relationship, once a partnership of equals, devolved into frequent arguments and extended periods of silence. Though they tried to shield Pamela from the worst of it, children often internalize more than adults realize. The home that once served as her sanctuary became a place of emotional confusion. The stress culminated in Pamela being diagnosed with clinical depression, adding yet another layer to her psychological burden. Although her parents eventually reconciled and committed to therapy to restore their marriage, the damage to Pamela's emotional landscape had already been done. She continued to battle low self-worth and a lingering sense of hopelessness. By the time she turned 13, doctors also diagnosed her with bipolar disorder, an illness that introduced alternating episodes of elevated mood and deep despair. Despite being placed on medication and undergoing regular psychiatric evaluations, the path ahead remained steep and uneven. In her teenage years, Pamela began to change physically. She blossomed into a striking young woman with a statuesque figure and expressive features that often drew compliments from strangers and admiration from her peers. However, this attention did not bolster her self-esteem. Instead, it added a new layer of anxiety. Pamela lacked the tools to process this attention in a healthy way and began relying on external validation to fill her inner void. Her emotional vulnerability led her to experiment with alcohol. What began as casual use during parties or small gatherings quickly became a coping mechanism. Her judgment, already compromised by her mental health challenges, further deteriorated. Her psychiatrist would later testify that Pamela's psychological profile made it difficult for her to fully comprehend the risks associated with her choices. She often lacked the capacity to give informed consent, a vulnerability that left her exposed. At just 16 years old, her reliance on alcohol had escalated to the point where her parents made the heart-wrenching decision to enroll her in a private rehabilitation facility. It was a last resort, a desperate attempt to shield her from further harm and to offer her a structured environment where she could heal. Initially, the treatment seemed promising. Pamela responded well to therapy and even began to reconnect with her studies. For a time, it seemed as though she was turning a corner. She returned home after several months in treatment, resumed school, and for over a year, managed to stay on track. Her progress brought a glimmer of hope to her family. But stability can be fleeting for those navigating severe mental health conditions. At 18, she met Claudiu, a 20-year-old man originally from Romania, whose charm and attention quickly won her over. He appeared to be caring, supportive even, but beneath the surface, his intentions were far from benign. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Claudiu became a central figure in Pamela's life, isolating her from her family and undermining her fragile recovery. Her erratic behavior returned. She skipped classes, disappeared for days, and began lying to those closest to her. Eventually, she stopped attending school altogether and ran away from home multiple times. Her parents were devastated. Desperate to find her and bring her home safely, they turned to law enforcement. Thanks to their efforts, Claudiu was located and taken into custody. The subsequent investigation revealed disturbing details about his influence over Pamela. He had coerced her into engaging in illegal activities to sustain their habits, exploiting her psychological fragility for his own gain. In court, Claudiu was sentenced to 4 years in prison. For Pamela's parents, the conviction brought some measure of justice, but it did little to ease their fears for their daughter's future. By mid-October of 2017, Alessandra and Stefano once again faced a painful decision. Recognizing the severity of Pamela's condition and the risks she continued to face, they arranged for her to be admitted to another specialized rehabilitation clinic. This time, they hoped the facility would offer a more intensive and tailored approach, one that could help her rebuild not just her health, but her sense of self-worth and independence. They remained hopeful, clinging to the belief that with the right care, their daughter might still find a path to stability. This time, in a renewed act of faith and desperation, Pamela's parents made a decision they believed might finally offer their daughter the peace and protection she so desperately needed. Determined to remove her from all familiar influences that had contributed to her relapse, Alessandra and Stefano selected a rehabilitation facility far from the distractions and dangers of city life. They hoped that physical distance from Rome and from the people and environments that had negatively impacted Pamela might lead to emotional clarity and genuine recovery. The center they chose was located in Matara, a quiet provincial town nestled in the countryside. The facility had a reputation for providing high-level psychological treatment and support, promising comprehensive, round-the-clock care tailored to the individual. It was not an inexpensive option. In fact, it was among the costliest in the country. Yet for Alessandra and Stefano, cost was not a concern. They were willing to exhaust their savings, delay business ventures, anything to give Pamela a fighting chance at reclaiming her life. They had already watched her suffer for years, oscillating between hope and despair, and they couldn't bear to let her fall again. The program itself was structured to last 3 months, and the treatment plan was multifaceted. Pamela was enrolled in a rigorous routine that included one-on-one psychotherapy, group therapy sessions, and medical supervision by a team of professionals. The therapeutic strategy was designed to not only address substance dependency, but also her underlying psychiatric diagnoses: borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and clinical depression. The center emphasized a holistic model, incorporating art therapy, yoga, and mindfulness training. From the outside, it appeared to be a haven of healing. Alessandra and Stefano, while cautious, allowed themselves to feel hope again. They expected the facility's high fees to reflect a higher standard of accountability, supervised outings, limited contact with the outside world, and, above all, strict oversight to prevent any chance of relapse. But behind the professional brochures and polished testimonials, the reality was starkly different. As time passed, Pamela seemed to show initial signs of progress. In her weekly phone calls with her parents, her voice appeared more animated, more optimistic. She even mentioned that the shared experiences of others in recovery made her feel less alone, less judged. For the first time in months, she said she could see a future for herself. Her therapists noted an improvement in her willingness to participate in group work and her ability to engage emotionally, albeit cautiously. However, beneath this surface progress, dangerous cracks had begun to form. The clinic, though marketed as secure and intensively managed, turned out to be lax in enforcement of its own rules. Curfews were poorly monitored. Patients were often permitted to leave the grounds without proper checks. Staff members were stretched thin and sometimes inattentive, allowing vulnerable residents, many of whom, like Pamela, required close supervision, to fall through the cracks. By early January 2018, Pamela's behavior began to change again. She grew more withdrawn, less communicative. Fellow patients later reported that she had begun sneaking out in the evenings, sometimes returning hours later without explanation. She avoided group activities and skipped therapy sessions. Her dependency, the very condition her stay was intended to treat, had begun resurfacing with increased intensity. Alarmingly, her primary physician did not report or act upon these red flags, failing to revise her care plan or inform her family of her regression. On the morning of January 29th, the illusion of progress collapsed. Pamela was no longer on the clinic grounds. A staff member made a call to Alessandra and Stefano, informing them with unsettling calmness that their daughter was missing and that she had apparently walked out. The initial explanation suggested a spontaneous escape, a sudden flight without warning. But further scrutiny of the facts painted a much more deliberate and concerning picture. A review of security camera footage from the facility showed Pamela methodically packing her belongings into a small suitcase. She was calm, composed. There was no sign of panic or urgency. She walked through the clinic's front door in broad daylight, completely unchallenged. No staff member stopped to ask her where she was going. No one followed her. No alert was issued until hours later. It was as though she had simply checked out of a hotel, rather than departed from a secure psychiatric treatment center. Interviews with other residents and staff revealed that Pamela had spoken openly, though quietly, about her growing disillusionment with the program. She told some that she planned to leave and return to Rome, convinced that the treatment she was receiving had failed to address her needs. It was clear, in retrospect, that this departure was premeditated, not impulsive. But Pamela never arrived in Rome. She never contacted her family. She didn't appear at any local station or boarding platform. Her phone remained off. It was as though she had vanished. Panicked, Alessandra and Stefano filed a missing persons report with local law enforcement. They appeared on a regional news broadcast, pleading for help and offering a monetary reward for any credible leads. Flyers were distributed across Matara and surrounding towns. The story quickly gained attention, but for 48 hours, there were no substantial developments. Then, on the afternoon of January 31, a startling call was made to emergency services by a local resident living just a few miles from the rehabilitation center. The man, whose identity was kept private for safety reasons, reported the presence of 2 unattended suitcases discarded in a shallow ditch near his property. The bags had been left in an odd manner and had a strong chemical odor. Concerned for his safety, he did not attempt to touch or open them. Police arrived swiftly, accompanied by bomb disposal experts and forensic technicians. The area was sealed off and examined with utmost caution. After determining there was no explosive threat, the investigators carefully opened the suitcases. What they discovered inside left them profoundly disturbed. Though specific details were not publicly disclosed in full to protect the dignity of the victim and her family, it was immediately evident that the discovery was connected to the ongoing search for Pamela Mastropietro. The contents were handled with precision by forensic teams, who noted the presence of a corrosive bleach-like chemical, likely used to eliminate biological evidence. This indicated an intentional effort to hinder identification and obstruct the investigation. Though identification could not be made on the spot, investigators notified Pamela's parents and requested their presence for assistance in the preliminary recognition process. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments of their lives, Alessandra and Stefano confirmed what they had feared the most. It was their daughter. Despite the attempt to destroy forensic evidence, the authorities pressed forward. They began retracing Pamela's steps from the clinic to her last known location. Surveillance footage from a nearby public square showed Pamela walking slowly, dressed in dark clothing, dragging her suitcase behind her. She appeared to be scanning her surroundings, possibly looking for transportation or someone specific. Footage showed her approaching a public transit stop, where she lingered for several minutes, at times raising her hand toward passing vehicles. Roughly 15 minutes after Pamela was last seen on surveillance footage near a public transit stop, a taxi pulled up alongside the curb. The footage, though slightly grainy due to the low evening light, clearly showed a young woman, visibly tired, dragging a compact suitcase, exchanging words with the driver. After a brief exchange, she climbed into the back seat. The timestamp on the footage marked it as one of her final confirmed sightings before the investigation would spiral into a labyrinth of leads, dead ends, and unsettling truths. Unfortunately, once the taxi turned the corner and left the range of the municipal surveillance system, the digital trail went dark. There were no other cameras positioned to capture the route they took or where Pamela was ultimately dropped off. With limited data to go on, investigators quickly turned their attention to identifying the vehicle. Using frame-by-frame analysis, traffic records, and license plate tracking, they successfully located the registered owner of the taxi and contacted the driver within hours. When investigators visited the driver's home and showed him a photo of Pamela, he immediately confirmed that he remembered her. His recollection was clear and detailed, and his cooperation with authorities was prompt. The driver explained that Pamela had approached him calmly, asking to be driven to the train station, stating that she intended to travel to Rome. However, by the time she arrived at the station, the final train of the day had already departed. According to his testimony, Pamela expressed her intention to wait overnight at the terminal until the next scheduled train in the morning. Concerned for her well-being, the driver told authorities that he offered her an alternative. He suggested that she rest at his nearby residence where she could be safe and comfortable rather than spending the night alone in a public space. To his surprise, Pamela accepted the offer without hesitation or inquiry. He recalled that she seemed tired, emotionally distant, and unusually trusting of someone she had only just met. The following morning, Pamela reportedly expressed discomfort, saying she felt physically unwell. The driver, noticing signs that resembled withdrawal symptoms, asked if she needed medical help, but Pamela declined. Instead, she requested to be dropped off at a small public park in the area, insisting that she needed some fresh air and time alone. The driver, while uneasy, respected her request. He dropped her off and watched her walk toward a bench beneath a cluster of trees before driving away. He claimed that this was the last time he saw her. Authorities verified the man's timeline through GPS records from the taxi's onboard system and corroborated his location data. While Pamela's parents were later critical of his decision to bring their vulnerable daughter to his home, a decision they believed reflected poor judgment, the court ultimately found no legal grounds to charge him with wrongdoing. The judge ruled that while his actions were questionable from a moral standpoint, there was no evidence of coercion, exploitation, or intent to cause harm. Pamela's mental health condition, while serious, did not legally render her incapable of consenting to non-criminal situations, such as accepting a ride or overnight shelter. The driver was formally cleared of any involvement in her disappearance. But the trail picked up again at the public park. There, Pamela encountered a man known locally by the name of Desmond. He was already familiar to authorities due to his involvement in various minor infractions, and was loosely connected to a broader network under informal investigation. Desmond, who had been under quiet surveillance for suspected low-level street dealing, was located and brought in for questioning soon after his name surfaced in connection with Pamela's last known movements. During a lengthy interview with detectives, Desmond acknowledged interacting with Pamela. He admitted that he had made a deal, exchanging a small amount for a necklace that Pamela was wearing. He insisted, however, that their exchange was brief and that he did not accompany her afterward. He described her as quiet and visibly distressed, but insisted she walked away on her own and that he had no further contact with her. Investigators, while not entirely convinced of his limited role, had no immediate evidence to contradict his version of events. Desmond was held in custody based on unrelated charges, including possession and distribution of substances and immigration-related concerns. Authorities considered him a person of interest, especially regarding a potential cover-up, but not the central suspect in Pamela's disappearance. The investigation took another turn when surveillance footage surfaced, showing Pamela entering a nearby pharmacy shortly after her interaction with Desmond. While her presence there was not inherently suspicious, what caught investigators' attention was another figure captured on camera entering and exiting the pharmacy around the same time. The man kept a subtle distance but seemed to be observing Pamela. His movements were cautious, deliberate. He exited the store just moments after she did, walking in the same direction. Using facial recognition and assistance from immigration authorities, police were able to identify the man as Innocent Osul, a 30-year-old Nigerian national who was living in Italy without formal documentation. His name had surfaced in connection with previous low-level criminal activity, though he had never been arrested for any violent offense. He lived in a low-income neighborhood just a few blocks from the park where Pamela was last seen. Investigators turned to Desmond once again and offered him a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. Under pressure, Desmond provided Innocent's address and additional context that placed both men in the vicinity of Pamela on the day she disappeared. A warrant was swiftly obtained. When police arrived at Innocent's apartment, the unit was empty, but officers were authorized to search the premises. What they found inside would dramatically alter the course of the investigation. In the small, dimly lit apartment, investigators discovered a series of items that raised immediate alarm. Stains consistent with biological material were found on the bathroom floor and walls, hastily cleaned but still visible under forensic lighting. Several items of women's clothing were found bundled in a laundry bin. Among them were garments matching the description of what Pamela had been wearing the day she left the clinic. When shown photographs of the items, Alessandra and Stefano, through visible anguish, identified them as their daughters. Further inspection of the bathroom revealed 4 empty bottles of chlorine bleach, all discarded under the sink. Investigators surmised that an attempt had been made to sanitize the space, but the cleaning had been insufficient to remove all evidence. Swabs were collected for DNA analysis. Surveillance footage from a commercial street just outside the apartment complex provided yet another piece of the puzzle. The video, time-stamped late at night on the same day Pamela went missing, showed Innocent carrying a large suitcase with visible difficulty. He was accompanied by 2 unidentified men, and together, they were seen loading the suitcase into a vehicle. That vehicle was later tracked to the same suburban ditch where 2 suitcases were discovered and reported by a concerned local resident. This new footage suggested that Innocent may not have acted alone. The presence of 2 other individuals pointed to the possibility of a coordinated effort, not only to transport evidence, but to obscure what had occurred. At this point, the case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It had evolved into a complex, multi-suspect criminal inquiry involving forensic evidence, witness accounts, and digital surveillance. The investigation into Pamela Mastropietro's disappearance and death took a crucial turn when the vehicle used to transport. Law enforcement officers followed a paper trail through traffic camera data, informal networks, and vehicle registration logs. Eventually, the car was linked not to Innocent Osul directly, but to a known associate of Desmond, a man named Lucky Alo. Lucky, who had previously maintained a low profile and had not been considered a central suspect, was arrested the same day his name surfaced. During the interrogation, it was established that Lucky was driving the car. He admitted to driving that night, with Innocent and Desmond both present in the car. Initially, Desmond tried to distance himself entirely, denying any knowledge. However, as more evidence was presented, including surveillance, digital data, and location tracking, his position became untenable. Faced with mounting pressure, both Lucky and Innocent gave statements to the police. They claimed they were merely helping to remove some things at Innocent's request, and that they had no idea what the suitcases contained. However, the police noted multiple inconsistencies in their accounts, and their lack of urgency in reporting the act raised serious suspicions. Innocent Osul was formally arrested on February 2, 2018. From the moment of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Pamela's death. Instead, he offered a strange and contradictory narrative that changed repeatedly during questioning. He initially told detectives that he had met Pamela at the park by chance. According to him, they began a casual conversation, and after a brief interaction, he invited her to his apartment. To the investigators' disbelief, Innocent said that Pamela willingly agreed to accompany him. What followed, according to his own words, was a scenario that raised red flags across the board. Innocent claimed that shortly after arriving at his apartment, Pamela suddenly lost consciousness. He stated that she collapsed unexpectedly, and when he attempted to revive her, he was unable to find any sign of life. He said he panicked, unsure of what to do. Fearful that no one would believe his version of events, especially given his undocumented status and criminal record, He admitted to using chemical agents in an attempt to eliminate DNA evidence in the apartment. Investigators took note of the vagueness of this claim, especially since bleach and similar agents had already been found at the scene. As for the role of Lucky and Desmond, Innocent's explanation evolved again. Upon waking, he alleged that Desmond and Lucky were already in the apartment, and it was they who suggested disposing of the suitcases. He attempted to present himself as a passive participant who was overwhelmed and misled by his acquaintances. Yet, forensic investigators were already uncovering details that told a far more deliberate story. Among the most significant findings were traces of Innocent's DNA under Pamela's fingernails. This critical evidence directly contradicted Innocent's claim that Pamela had simply collapsed. Both Desmond and Lucky continued to deny having entered Innocent's apartment at any point during the alleged incident. They insisted their only involvement came afterward, when they were asked for transportation assistance. They emphasized their connections to unrelated illegal activities as a way of explaining their presence in the area that night. Their alibis were partly corroborated by external sources, though key gaps in their stories persisted. Even so, the lack of direct evidence linking them to the scene at the time of death limited the prosecution's ability to charge them as full accomplices. While the three men remained in custody, a dedicated forensic task force worked tirelessly and reconstruct the timeline of her final hours. Progress was slow and methodical. For more than 6 months, the case hovered in limbo. The prosecution knew that although Innocent was the primary suspect, a conviction would require airtight evidence, particularly since much of the forensic material had been contaminated or compromised by the chemical cleaning efforts. Eventually, investigators decided to pursue a more strategic approach. Believing Innocent might confide in someone he trusted, they arranged for an undercover informant to be placed in his prison cell. The individual, posing as a fellow detainee, gradually built a rapport with Innocent over weeks. They shared meals, engaged in casual conversation, and discussed their respective charges. Over time, Innocent's guarded demeanor began to fade. Feeling increasingly comfortable, he eventually opened up. In a series of unguarded conversations, he confessed to his role in Pamela's death. The informant, who was equipped with a concealed recording device approved by legal authorities, captured the admissions in full. Innocent did not describe every detail, but clearly stated that he had panicked when Pamela lost consciousness and chose to cover it up, fearing arrest and deportation. The recording became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. When court proceedings began, the informant was brought forward as a key witness, providing not only testimony but also audio evidence. This bombshell was followed by another unexpected development. Lucky Alo came forward voluntarily, revealing that Innocent had contacted him directly during the night of the incident, asking for immediate help. This testimony aligned closely with the evidence and with Innocent's own recorded confession. Prosecutors now had a compelling narrative backed by DNA, digital tracking, witness statements, and the defendant's own words. The trial of Innocent Osel, Desmond, and Lucky Ilo commenced in the spring of 2019, attracting widespread media attention. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal observers, and grieving supporters of Pamela's family. For Alessandra and Stefano, it marked the culmination of a painful journey through bureaucratic delays, emotional trauma, and public scrutiny. By May 2019, the verdict was delivered. Innocent Osel was found guilty on multiple counts, including committing non-consensual acts, unlawful confinement, and attempting to obstruct justice by destroying evidence. The court ruled that the evidence against him was overwhelming and consistent, and that his shifting accounts only further demonstrated his culpability. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence upheld through multiple appeals. As for Desmond and Lucky, although the court did not find enough evidence to prove they had actively participated in the central crime, it did determine that they were aware of the gravity of the situation and had chosen not to report it. They were both convicted, and the court acknowledged that their silence and cooperation in disposing of evidence, even without full knowledge, contributed to delaying justice. Both men received 5-year prison sentences. On the morning of Sunday, October 28th, Derek made an urgent call to 911, claiming that his wife was unresponsive and that he was attempting to perform CPR. When the dispatcher asked him to explain what had happened, Derek's response lacked clarity and specifics, offering no clear account of the events leading up to the emergency. Paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes, but despite their efforts, it was already too late. Responding police officers began to evaluate the situation right away, and several details quickly aroused their suspicion. The scene appeared unusual and unsettling, prompting authorities to contact homicide detectives for further investigation. What investigators discovered at the scene painted a grim and chaotic picture, one that strongly suggested foul play. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Kim Dorsey was born on October 10, 1974 in Jacksonville, Florida, to Dennis Dunn and Sally Ann Barron Dunn. From the very beginning, Kim stood out, not only for her intelligence, but also for her sense of determination and quiet strength. She grew up in a loving home where achievement was encouraged, but humility was valued just as much. Friends and family recall a child with both grit and grace. Someone who could recite multiplication tables with ease, but also wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty fixing a broken bicycle chain. Her classmates remember her not only as a straight A student, but as someone who offered help without being asked. She was the kind of student who volunteered to tutor peers after school, yet still made time for extracurriculars. Teachers described her as unusually mature for her age, focused and self-driven. Weekends often found the Dunn family volunteering at Dogwood Park, where Kim developed her love for animals and her community. Those volunteer days weren't just about walking dogs or cleaning up trails. They were family bonding experiences rooted in kindness and giving back. Her early success in academics and her tireless curiosity hinted at the path she would one day pursue. By the mid-1990s, Kim had her sights set on a career in engineering, an ambitious goal at a time when women were still underrepresented in the field. She enrolled at the University of North Florida, where she pursued a degree in civil engineering with an unwavering focus. Kim's university years were a blur of late-night study sessions, internships, and student leadership. She became an early and active member of the Women in Construction Club, advocating for more inclusive practices in the building trades. Her professors noted her fascination with Florida's building codes, particularly those related to hurricane resilience, a subject that resonated deeply in a state constantly under threat from nature's fury. After graduation, Kim didn't just stop at earning a diploma. She sat for Florida's rigorous state licensing exam and proudly earned her certified general contractor license, a major milestone that underscored her capability and commitment. But even that wasn't enough for someone like Kim. In her late 20s, she founded a boutique construction firm that focused on environmentally responsible and storm-resistant building practices. She quickly built a reputation for excellence and was soon appointed director of training, where she taught city inspectors how to assess structural vulnerabilities and strengthen buildings in preparation for hurricane season. Kim's professional life was full of hard hats, high-pressure deadlines, and site walkthroughs, but she managed to balance it all with a vibrant personal life. Around the year 2000, she met Derek Dorsey, a Jacksonville firefighter and paramedic. Friends and colleagues say the chemistry between them was instant, sparked by a shared love of classic muscle cars, spontaneous road trips, and a deep compassion for animals. Derek, known for his calm under pressure and dedication to public service, matched Kim's energy in all the right ways. They bonded over their mutual desire to help others, whether it was rescuing dogs or volunteering at local shelters. After dating for a couple of years, Kim and Derek married and purchased a cozy, well-kept brick home on Eastbury Drive in Jacksonville's South Side. To neighbors, the Dorseys seemed like the perfect couple. They hosted annual 4th of July barbecues, lent tools to anyone who needed them, and were always quick with a friendly wave or a helping hand. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic, a well-matched couple with rewarding careers and a strong sense of community. But behind the cheerful exterior, there were some quiet struggles. According to Derek, Kim battled periods of depression. Friends recall that she sometimes mentioned trouble sleeping and gaining weight that wouldn't budge, though she rarely let on how much it truly bothered her. She spoke about it with a wry sense of humor, making light of the symptoms even while she sought professional treatment. Despite the emotional weight, She never missed a training session, a site visit, or a charity event. Kim approached mental health with the same grit she applied to everything else, head-on and without self-pity. By October 2012, things seemed to have finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kim had just wrapped up the rollout of a new training program. Derek had recently switched to 24-hour shifts at the fire station, and the couple had made tentative plans to spend a quiet weekend at the beach once hurricane season had passed. Life, it seemed, was on an upswing. Then came the weekend that changed everything. On the morning of Saturday, October 27, 2012, Derek kissed Kim goodbye around 7 a.m. before heading off for a long shift. It was routine. Nothing seemed out of place. When he returned home the following morning, on Sunday, October 28th, shortly after 8 a.m., he expected to find Kim still in bed. Their bedroom had thick blackout curtains, so it was nearly pitch dark. But what he found inside that room wasn't just unexpected, it was devastating. Derek immediately called 911, reporting that his wife was unresponsive and that he was administering CPR. When asked by the dispatcher what had happened, his answer was vague and non-specific. Emergency services arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Police officers at the scene began assessing the situation immediately, and what they saw raised red flags. The bedroom showed signs that this had not been a natural death. Homicide detectives were called in. Early estimates from the medical examiner revealed that Kim had died roughly 24 hours before the 911 call, around the same time Derek had left for work the previous morning. The crime scene told a chaotic and chilling story. In the kitchen, more strange clues emerged. Drawers had been yanked open and their contents dumped out. Remote controls and a keypad for a surround sound system were inexplicably piled in the sink. It looked as though someone had been searching for something. Maybe valuables, or maybe something else. And while the front door showed no signs of forced entry, there was an odd detail that caught the detective's attention. A ceramic dog statue that usually stood upright by the entrance had been knocked over. It was subtle, but enough to suggest movement or a hurried exit. Police quickly came to a working theory. This wasn't a random break-in. The absence of forced entry suggested that Kim either let her attacker in willingly, or that the person had access to the house already. Given the circumstances surrounding Kim Dorsey's tragic death, it was hardly unexpected that her husband, Derek Dorsey, became the first person detectives turned to. As the last person known to have seen Kim alive and the one who discovered her, his timeline, actions, and relationship with his wife came under immediate scrutiny. He was brought to the Jacksonville Police Department for formal questioning shortly after the initial investigation began. Detectives approached the interview methodically, aiming to understand Derek's movements and behavior over the course of the weekend in question. He was calm, cooperative, and appeared open to sharing information. When asked to recount the days leading up to the incident, Derek provided a seemingly straightforward account. On Friday, Kim had left the house for a few hours to run errands, which included a shopping trip. That evening, they stayed in, ordered food, and watched a movie together. A quiet, uneventful night by his description. Derek explained that he had to work a 24-hour shift beginning early Saturday morning. He left the house around 7 a.m. and drove to his assigned fire station, located on the northern outskirts of the county. The station was approximately 15 miles from their home, and while not remote, the area was known for spotty mobile phone reception. He claimed to have tried contacting Kim several times throughout the day, but his calls either failed to go through or were dropped mid-connection. He wrapped up his shift by 8 a.m. Sunday and drove straight home, only to discover what he described as a devastating and surreal scene. At first glance, Derek's account appeared to match the basic facts available to detectives. His story aligned with his work schedule, and initial timelines didn't present any glaring inconsistencies. However, there was one detail that detectives found puzzling. Derek, a seasoned emergency responder with years of field experience, had spoken in a disoriented and almost incoherent manner during the 911 call. It struck investigators as odd that someone so trained in crisis situations would react in such a scattered way. This discrepancy raised questions. Was it emotional distress? Was he hiding something? Or was he possibly involved in some way? As the interview progressed, detectives steered the conversation toward his marriage. Derek described his relationship with Kim as unconventional but consensual. According to him, they had agreed years earlier to maintain a form of open relationship, allowing both partners to explore connections outside of their marriage. However, he said Kim had stepped away from that lifestyle after suffering the loss of her mother, which occurred roughly 3 to 4 years prior. He explained that Kim had taken the loss very hard, which led her to seek mental health support. As part of her treatment, she began taking prescribed medication that, while effective, came with side effects including weight gain. Derek noted that these changes may have affected how Kim saw herself, though she continued to function in her career and daily life with characteristic discipline. While Kim had reportedly ended her involvement with others, detectives needed to know whether Derek had done the same. In many investigations, strained relationships or romantic entanglements become crucial threads. Derek admitted he was currently seeing another woman. This raised natural questions. Had he fallen in love with someone else? Did he want out of the marriage? Was there any potential financial motive? When detectives asked if Kim had a life insurance policy, Derek replied that she did not. That removed one possible incentive, but the inquiry didn't end there. Detectives evaluated Derek's alibi more closely. The travel time from his fire station to the house was roughly 30 minutes each way, meaning a round trip would take close to an hour. They questioned his fellow firefighters, all of whom confirmed that Derek had been present at the station throughout the entirety of his shift. The firehouse was small, the kind where comings and goings are hard to miss. Their accounts matched his own, confirming that Derek had what investigators often refer to as an airtight alibi. This discovery forced detectives to broaden their focus. Still, suspicion lingered. Love triangles, jealousy, and broken promises have long played a role in domestic tragedies. Investigators considered whether Derek's girlfriend might have had a motive, perhaps fueled by resentment or an unfulfilled promise of divorce. But after a thorough interview and review of her whereabouts, she too was cleared of suspicion. She had a solid alibi for the time frame in question. With both Derek and his girlfriend effectively ruled out, detectives returned to the Dorsey residence for a fresh examination of the crime scene. Sometimes, a second pass can reveal things that were overlooked in the initial wave of activity. This time, they brought in behavioral analysts and forensic experts to help reconstruct the sequence of events. These specialists offered new perspectives. Their task was to determine the point of origin, the moment the confrontation began. According to their findings, the altercation likely started upstairs, where a pool sticks normally kept in a storage rack had been taken and used. The knife, later recovered from the kitchen, was part of a matched set located in a drawer that wasn't in plain view. These details strongly suggested that the perpetrator wasn't a stranger. This was someone familiar with the home's layout. Someone who either lived there at some point or spent enough time in the house to know where things were stored. That alone shifted the direction of the investigation. If the person responsible had intimate knowledge of the home, then it was highly likely that they had a personal connection to the Dorsey family. More tellingly, investigators had already recovered a DNA sample from the scene that they believed belonged to the assailant. Now they needed to match that sample against known individuals who had been inside the home. Detectives pressed Derek for names. Who had stayed in their home before? Who had access to the property when he wasn't there? It turned out that Derek, aside from being a firefighter, also worked as a general contractor and often employed day laborers and subcontractors. Some of these workers, particularly during hard times, had even stayed at the Dorsey residence temporarily. As detectives dug deeper into the growing web of people who had once passed through the Dorsey household, one name repeatedly resurfaced: Lance Kirkpatrick. Derek Dorsey reported that Lance was someone he had once worked with on various contracting jobs. Over time, the two developed what Derek described as a casual friendship, born more out of shared labor than personal closeness. But when Lance hit a rough patch, Derek did what he had done for others in the past. He extended a helping hand. Wanting to offer stability to someone struggling, Derek allowed Lance to live in his home for several months. At first, things were amicable. Lance was quiet, respectful, and helped out with small repairs and errands. But that arrangement began to deteriorate when Lance reportedly started drinking more heavily. According to Derek, the shift in Lance's behavior became noticeable. He was no longer the subdued houseguest, but someone who brought tension into the home. Eventually, things reached a point where Derek had to ask him to leave. Derek claimed the decision wasn't made lightly, but Kim had grown increasingly uncomfortable, and their peaceful home life had begun to fray. When investigators asked where Lance had been the weekend, Derek said that, as far as he knew, Lance had been out on a boat in the Atlantic Ocean, far from Jacksonville, and presumably with no access to a vehicle or way to return. This alibi, while difficult to verify immediately, gave detectives pause. It was vague and lacked a concrete location or witness confirmation. Still, without solid evidence placing him at the crime scene, they had to keep moving. The second individual Derek mentioned was someone named Joshua Vey, another man he had taken under his wing during his side work as a general contractor. Much like with Lance, Derek offered Joshua both employment and temporary housing. Joshua lived in their home for a time, though the arrangement eventually fell apart due to disagreements, likely personality clashes or differing expectations. While Joshua moved out, Derek continued to offer him occasional work doing small jobs or manual labor. According to Derek, he had plans to meet Joshua on the morning of Kim's death. In fact, Derek explained that after wrapping up his 24-hour shift at the fire station on Sunday morning, he was supposed to meet Joshua at a local convenience store. They had arranged to connect there so Joshua could join him on a new work project. But Joshua never showed up. That detail raised a red flag for investigators. If Joshua was eager for employment and needed the income, why would he fail to appear at a scheduled meeting with someone offering him a job? Now under heightened suspicion, Joshua Vey was located and brought in for questioning. During the interview, detectives pressed him about his whereabouts over the weekend. Joshua claimed he had spent the entire time partying at his home with friends, adding that he hadn't left his house during the hours the crime occurred. The detectives then shifted gears and asked whether he had ever been romantically involved with Kim Dorsey. Joshua denied any such relationship. His answers were relatively straightforward, until detectives reported that Kim had died. At that moment, Joshua's demeanor changed dramatically. He began crying, visibly upset, seemingly overwhelmed. But the detectives were experienced and cautious. Emotional outbursts, especially when a suspect is told of a death, can be either authentic or performative. Was this guilt, shock, or an attempt to appear sympathetic? Regardless, protocol required a DNA sample, which Joshua provided voluntarily. When the forensic analysis came back, it conclusively showed that Joshua Vey's DNA did not match the sample recovered from the scene. That eliminated him as a suspect and brought the police no closer to solving Kim Dorsey's murder. Determined not to overlook any possibility, detectives returned to Derek Dorsey and requested a full list of every person who had stayed at or spent significant time in the Dorsey household in recent years. This process was extensive. Names were cross-checked, interviews were conducted, and DNA samples were collected and tested. One by one, all were ruled out. Either their alibis were verified, or their DNA failed to match the forensic evidence. Still searching for clarity, the investigative team decided to revisit the crime scene with Derek himself in tow. Walking through the house with someone who knows its layout can yield subtle but critical insights. As they moved through the kitchen, Derek pointed out the strangest part of the scene. 4 remote controls, part of the home's surround sound system, had been tossed into the sink. The remotes had been soaked, likely damaged beyond repair. To seasoned detectives, this was not a random act. It looked calculated. Whoever did this may have been trying to erase fingerprints or DNA, thinking the water might destroy forensic evidence. That level of precaution hinted that the intruder was familiar not just with the house, but with what could be used against them in an investigation. Even more intriguing, when Derek turned on the TV during the walkthrough, a movie began playing. A title he swore he had never watched. This sparked a chilling possibility. Had the person responsible lingered in the house after committing the crime? Could they have calmly watched a movie in the living room, perhaps to regroup or wait for the right moment to leave? That recollection triggered another memory in Derek's mind. On Friday afternoon, just about 12 hours before Kim's estimated time of death, a technician had visited the home to fix ongoing issues with their entertainment system. There had been problems with the remote controls, and Derek had called the company to schedule a service call. The technician came, completed the repairs, and left. But could he have returned? Investigators quickly tracked down the technician. During the interview, they noticed that he had visible cuts on his hands. When asked, he said the injuries were work-related, typical for someone dealing with wires, tools, and sharp corners on a daily basis. He denied any involvement in the crime and was cooperative with the process, even agreeing to a DNA swab. When results came back, his DNA did not match what had been found at the Dorsey home. The case seemed to stall, until a routine police database search turned up a highly relevant report. A vehicle-related complaint classified as temporary authorized use. That's legal terminology for a very specific situation, where someone is given permission to use a car, but then fails to return it as agreed. The report had been filed just 17 hours before Kim's death. The complainant? A young woman. The person she had let borrow her vehicle? Lance Kirkpatrick. Lance had told Derek he would be out on a boat that weekend, but the police report painted a very different picture. The woman who filed the complaint said that she, Lance, and a few others were at a party on Friday night. Sometime during the evening, Lance offered to go out and get drinks. She allowed him to use her car, a decision she would soon regret, because he never came back. This bombshell reopened the case in a whole new light. Lance's ocean alibi now looked increasingly unreliable. Detectives shifted focus. The next logical question: did that car, the one Lance was last seen driving, ever travel near Kim Dorsey's home? When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, their responsibilities extended far beyond securing the area and collecting physical evidence. One of the most vital components of any investigation, especially one involving a potential homicide, is speaking with those who might have seen or heard something suspicious. So, as part of their early procedural steps, the patrol officers began canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on doors, spoke to residents, and asked a range of questions. Had anyone seen an unfamiliar car? A stranger walking around? Any sounds or disruptions? One neighbor, living just a few houses down from the Dorseys, told an officer that he had noticed a small blue SUV parked outside the Dorsey home on the morning of the incident. The vehicle had caught his attention not because of any overtly alarming behavior, but simply because it wasn't one of the usual cars seen on that quiet suburban street. The description matched the exact make and color of the vehicle Lance Kirkpatrick had been seen driving, and which, according to a recent report, had been taken without being returned from a party the night before. A few days later, investigators received a critical tip that dramatically narrowed their focus. Surveillance footage had been recovered from a home security system just down the street from the Dorsey residence. The timestamp on the footage was chilling. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on the day Kim Dorsey lost her life, the small blue SUV was clearly visible, parked directly in front of her house. The car remained there for a short while before vanishing from the frame. This visual evidence was the missing puzzle piece. Once confirmed, Lance Kirkpatrick was no longer just a person of interest. He became the primary suspect. To locate him, detectives reached back out to the woman who had originally loaned the vehicle to Lance at the Friday night party. She explained that after Lance left with the vehicle, she hadn't seen him again and had no idea where he might be. However, she did provide another valuable lead. A friend of Lance's named Brian Kiefer. She believed Brian might know where Lance had gone after the party. Investigators wasted no time. Brian was picked up for questioning and brought to the precinct for a formal interview. At first, Brian appeared cooperative. He explained that he had also been at the same party where the SUV had disappeared. When asked about his involvement, Brian was quick to clarify that he wasn't the one who had driven off with the vehicle, but he was concerned when Lance disappeared. In fact, he said he'd spent most of the night riding around in a taxi trying to track Lance down. He said he hadn't been successful until the following day. When he finally found Lance, He said he looked worn out, disheveled. He had a noticeable wound on one of his arms. But it wasn't just Lance's physical state that disturbed Brian. It was what he said next. According to Brian, Lance confessed in vague but deeply disturbing terms. He reportedly told Brian something along the lines of, "I'm going to jail." He didn't elaborate much at first, but then began to mention things only someone directly involved would know. Details that hadn't yet been released publicly and would have been impossible for someone on the outside to fabricate. His tone was flat, not dramatic. This wasn't a boast. It was more like a resigned acknowledgement. Brian said that while he was stunned by what he was hearing, he didn't know what to do in the moment. He hadn't initially gone to the police, unsure of what was true and what might have been alcohol-fueled exaggeration. Detectives knew that confessions can come from many places. Sometimes guilt overpowers a person's need for secrecy. Other times, substances such as alcohol loosen tongues. But Brian's account was serious enough to warrant immediate action. At this point, there were two possibilities. Either Lance Kirkpatrick was the perpetrator, or Brian Kiefer knew more than he was admitting, possibly implicating himself. But then Brian provided something unexpected. He told detectives that Lance was hiding in the attic of his house. That single admission changed everything. Officers moved quickly. A team was dispatched to Brian's home. There, hiding in a cramped, dusty attic space, they found Lance Kirkpatrick. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed eerily calm, as if he had already accepted that his freedom was over. Back at the station, Lance was placed in an interview room and questioned about his relationship with the Dorsey family. He admitted that he had known Derek Dorsey for quite some time. They had worked together in construction, and he had even lived at the Dorsey home for a period during a difficult chapter in his life. That arrangement gave him insight into the family's habits, including the layout of the home and Derek's rotating firefighter schedule. Lance confirmed he knew Derek would not be home that Saturday. He would be on a 24-hour shift. That meant Kim would be home alone. When asked directly about his relationship with Kim, Lance maintained that there were never any problems between them. But before investigators could dig deeper, Lance requested an attorney. The interview came to an abrupt halt. With no verbal confession and no cooperation, detectives were forced to rely entirely on forensic evidence. This is where technology and science stepped in. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from Lance's father and compared it to the DNA collected at the crime scene. The results were definitive. The familial DNA match left no room for doubt. Lance Kirkpatrick's genetic profile matched the biological material recovered from Kim Dorsey's home. This not only confirmed his presence at the scene, but it also definitively ruled out Brian Kiefer, whose name could now be cleared. Piecing together everything they had learned, detectives believed Lance had been strategic and premeditated in his actions. The timeline was damning. After leaving the party on Friday night with the borrowed vehicle, he disappeared until the following day. Surveillance showed him near Kim Dorsey's home early that morning. He knew where the spare key was hidden, beneath a decorative ceramic dog statue by the front entrance. He knew the Dorseys well enough to anticipate their routines. He let himself in quietly, but it's believed Kim heard or sensed his presence. What followed inside the house remains partially unknown, locked behind silence. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Lance Kirkpatrick initially pleaded not guilty. He refused to admit responsibility in the early stages of the legal process. But nearly 2 years after Kim's death, as the case approached trial, he reversed course. Lance ultimately admitted to causing Kim's death, but claimed it had not been intentional. His version of events portrayed the incident as a tragic accident that unfolded in a heated moment. He insisted he had not come to harm Kim, and that things had escalated in ways he hadn't foreseen. During trial proceedings, Lance painted a picture of himself as a close friend of the Dorseys. He said that Kim had even helped train him in fitness. They reportedly went to the gym together multiple times a week and occasionally had drinks afterward. He described their relationship as friendly, casual, and based on mutual support. However, under cross-examination, these comments only raised more questions than answers. Notably, he admitted that the DVD found playing in the Dorsey home's entertainment system belonged to him. That piece of evidence, initially baffling, now made sense. Investigators believed he had stayed inside the house after the crime, possibly watching the film, possibly trying to decide what to do next. As for why he didn't call 911, Lance claimed he panicked. He said he was overwhelmed, frightened, and unsure of what to do. Instead of seeking help, he fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would eventually bring him to justice. "I was frantic. I didn't know what to do. I was scared," Kirkpatrick told the court, his voice low and unsteady. "I just sat and was waiting for the police." His words, while simple, were delivered with a visible mix of anxiety and weariness. To some, he sounded remorseful. To others, evasive. The courtroom, already heavy with emotion, grew quieter still. But it was the cross-examination that truly tested Kirkpatrick's account. The prosecuting attorney, determined to hold him accountable in the eyes of the jury, began pressing him hard. Piece by piece, the state sought to highlight contradictions in Kirkpatrick's testimony, pointing out inconsistencies between what he had told detectives and what he was now telling the court. At times, Kirkpatrick appeared confused. At others, defensive. His responses lacked clarity, and as the prosecution weaved through the facts of the case, his stolen vehicle access, his prior knowledge of Derek Dorsey's schedule, the hidden key, the damaged remotes, and the DVD he admitted was his, it became harder for the jury to ignore the growing list of unsettling truths. Then came the final piercing question. What punishment do you think you deserve for what happened to Kim Dorsey? For a long moment, there was silence. All eyes turned toward the witness stand. Kirkpatrick, now visibly affected, looked down before responding. "I'm guilty," he said softly, voice cracking. "I don't know what I want right now." His answer was both an admission and a deflection. While acknowledging his guilt, he still avoided stating what he believed justice should look like. It was a moment that encapsulated much of the trial. Layers of emotional ambiguity, personal failure, and irreversible loss. Following days of deliberations and testimony, the jury returned with their sentencing recommendation in May 2015. Though the prosecution had pursued the death penalty, the jury ultimately opted for mercy over capital punishment. They recommended 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge accepted their recommendation, and Lance Kirkpatrick was officially sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Following the sentencing, Kim's husband, Derek Dorsey, stood to speak, his expression strained and tearful. "Kim Dorsey was so much more than a firefighter's wife," he said. "She was my partner, my best friend, and the strongest person I've ever known." At precisely 7 a.m., a neighbor, startled but quick to act, grabbed the phone and called 911. Though shaken by what they had seen or heard, their instincts kicked in, and within seconds, they were reporting the emergency to authorities. 2 Lakeland police officers arrived on the scene within minutes. Without hesitation, they made their way into the building. One officer picked up the radio and called for detectives. This wasn't a routine call. It was clear something more serious was unfolding. Moments later, yellow police tape went up, sealing off the stairwell. The area became a crime scene. Uniformed officers began going door to door, speaking with tenants, asking if they had seen or heard anything unusual. Inside the apartment, a crime scene technician began taking photographs. Among the details captured were unsettling clues. A torn window screen lay discarded on the floor. Faint impressions of sneaker soles marked the surface of a dresser. Oddly, nothing appeared to be missing. From the start, detectives began to form a chilling conclusion. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. The scene told a different story. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Born on January 6, 1950 in Lakeland, Florida, Linda Slatten came into the world in the heart of Polk County, where citrus groves stretch for miles and small-town charm masks dark undercurrents. She would live her entire life in this central Florida town, a place that would one day become the scene of one of its most haunting cold cases. Linda grew up a typical Southern girl of the 50s, raised in a working-class family. Friends described her as warm, soft-spoken, and fiercely devoted to those she loved. By her early 20s, Linda had married and soon gave birth to 2 sons, Jeffrey and Timothy. But her marriage didn't last. By the late 1970s, Linda was a single mother, raising her boys on her own while working hard to keep the family afloat. To outsiders, it was an unremarkable life. But behind the scenes, Linda was fighting to rebuild, working jobs to support her sons, and leaning on her faith and friends for strength. She was determined to give Jeffrey and Tim a stable home, even if that meant sacrificing her own ambitions and comfort. Despite the weight she carried, Linda remained optimistic. She was known in her neighborhood as kind and polite. Her boys adored her. To them, she was more than a mother. She was their protector, their everything. In the summer of 1981, Tim, her youngest, joined a local youth football team. Linda encouraged the activity. It gave the boys structure and community. Lakeland, Florida, still breathed with the muggy warmth of summer on the evening of Thursday, September 3, 1981. Cicadas sang from the oak trees that lined North Brunel Parkway. Porch lights blinked on one by one, and the 2-story brick complex at 144 Kettles Avenue seemed as safe and ordinary as any working-class building in the state. Linda, age 31, had moved in only weeks earlier, determined to craft a fresh chapter after separating from her husband. By day, she cashiered at a local convenience store, but by night she was a fiercely present single mother, intent on turning the rough edges of life into something soft for her boys, Jeff and Tim. That Thursday started with promise. Linda's shift ended close to dusk, and after clocking out, she hurried to Bryant Stadium to collect Jeff from football practice. The assistant coach, a friendly 20-something named Joe Mills, who often ran kids home when parents were tight on gas, offered them a ride. Jeff and Tim climbed into Linda's brown Chevrolet Chevette, shoulder pads squeaking, all chatter about the team's new playbook. Inside the apartment kitchen, Linda fried hamburger patties, laced her gravy with black pepper the way Tim begged for, and served the boys on mismatched plates while a portable TV hummed with the Thursday night lineup. She phoned her sister Judy around 8, joking that the only men in her life were 2 wild roommates and Walter Cronkite. Judy heard laughter filter through the line, the kind that suggests a woman who is exhausted yet determined to stay optimistic. Then Linda promised to drop off borrowed Tupperware next week, said, "Love you," and clicked the receiver onto its cradle. It would be their last conversation. By 10:30 that Thursday night, the small apartment on Kettles Avenue had fallen into its usual hush. The soft amber glow of the living room lamps cast long shadows across the floor as the ceiling fan hummed above. The boys had unfolded the sleeper sofa, tossing sheets across the springy mattress. Jeff, the elder by 3 years and proud of his self-appointed role as the protector, took the spot closest to the hallway. He claimed it gave him a better view in case any monsters decided to sneak in. It was an old tradition of theirs, a holdover from when Tim was younger and still had trouble falling asleep without a nightlight. Nearby, clutched tightly in Tim's small hands, was a wooden Little League bat. Their mother, Linda, had allowed them to keep it nearby, just in case, though everyone knew it was more for comfort than defense, a talisman, not an actual tool of safety. In the kitchenette, the faint clinking of dishes signaled the end of the night's cleanup. Linda emerged moments later, drying her damp hands on a dish rag. She paused for a moment to take in the scene. Her boys already winding down, the apartment finally quiet. Leaning over the back of the couch, she kissed each forehead with the soft precision of nightly ritual. "Bus comes at 7 sharp," she reminded them, smoothing Jeff's unruly hair. "Don't be late." She pointed at the corner where Jeff's football practice jersey lay crumpled. "Put that in the hamper unless you want your coach thinking you practice in a swamp." Her footsteps padded softly down the hallway, past the cracked bathroom door and into the small bedroom at the back. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that signaled the end of the day's responsibilities. Outside the building, under the thick canopy of Florida's humid night, someone else was just beginning their own dark choreography. In the shadows of the courtyard, half shrouded by the sagging branches of an oak tree and the burnt-out porch light above Unit B, a man stood still, watching. He blended into the silence like a forgotten statue, unnoticed, unremarkable. If anyone had seen him hours earlier, they might have mistaken him for a delivery driver or perhaps a neighbor from another complex. He had been here before, several times in fact, always during the day, always under the guise of something ordinary. But nighttime changes things. Familiarity takes on a different shape in the dark. The faces you know become silhouettes, and the laws you trust begin to feel negotiable. This was not random. He knew which units were occupied, which tenants worked night shifts, which doors creaked when pushed. And he knew something specific about this apartment. The bedroom window in Unit C hadn't latched properly since Linda had forced it open during the move-in months earlier. She'd meant to fix it. She never did. A rusting air conditioning unit protruded from the wall just below the sill. It wasn't stable, but it was enough. With the caution of someone rehearsed, the man placed one foot on the metal box, then the other. The screen was popped free with barely a sound. The blinds fluttered softly, but no light came on inside. He slipped through the open window in a practiced motion, his body folding easily over the frame, landing with barely a whisper on the worn carpet beneath. Inside the bedroom, the ceiling fan turned lazily, pushing damp air through the room. The man paused, allowing his eyes to adjust. The glow of the digital clock blinked from the nightstand. 11:58 p.m. Outside, the occasional car passed on US Highway 92. A sprinkler sputtered to life on the neighboring lawn. From within the apartment, all was still. Even decades later, detectives in Lakeland still find themselves caught in the murky fog of that night. What happened next inside Unit C has remained a painful mystery, pieced together only through subtle signs, trace evidence, and educated deduction. There was no crash of broken furniture, no overturned lamps. The official cause of Linda's passing would later be identified as strangulation, but her room remained almost eerily undisturbed. Jeff, lying half asleep on the pull-out couch, would later recall hearing what he described as a thump. A single muffled noise that barely broke through the nighttime quiet. He assumed it was just a car door or a neighbor dropping something upstairs. The sound folded into the traffic hum and vanished. By morning, Kettles Avenue looked the same. The sun rose as it always did, golden and indifferent. At exactly 6:45 a.m., Jeff's alarm began its familiar beeping rhythm. He rubbed his eyes, nudged Tim with an elbow, and groggily made his way toward the bathroom. That's when he noticed something odd. His mother's bedroom door was slightly open. Not wide, just ajar. Enough to feel off. Still, it didn't raise alarm, not immediately. In the kitchen, the boys poured cereal into mismatched bowls, arguing over who had last picked the prize from the box. They tossed football stats back and forth like trading cards. But Linda didn't appear. After 10 minutes, Jeff walked back to the hallway and tapped on her door. "Mom? Wake up, we'll miss the bus." Nothing. He waited, then pushed gently on the door. Without a word, Jeff spun around. He grabbed Tim's arm and dragged him down the hallway, feet slapping against the linoleum. They ran down the apartment stairs, banging on their neighbor's door until the latch finally clicked open. The neighbor, groggy but alert, recognized something was wrong immediately. She dialed 911 at 7 a.m. Her voice, though composed, cracked slightly as she gave the address and brief details. Within minutes, 2 Lakeland patrol officers arrived on scene. They wrapped the boys in crocheted afghans to ward off the early morning chill, then escorted them away from the building as protocol demanded. The stairwell to Unit C was quickly cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. Neighbors peered from behind blinds. Some whispered. Others stared blankly. A crime scene technician moved with methodical precision, snapping photographs that would later become part of the permanent record. A torn window screen lay crumpled on the carpet. Faint sneaker prints marked the edge of a dresser. A single mud-caked smear streaked across the corner of a white bedskirt. Subtle, but telling. Nothing obvious was missing. Linda's purse sat undisturbed, holding $32 and a neatly folded stack of grocery coupons. Her modest jewelry box remained open, but every piece was accounted for. To the responding detectives, it became immediately clear that theft had not been the motive. In the hours that followed, Lakeland, normally a quiet, suburban patchwork of trimmed lawns and screened-in porches, suddenly shifted. The sense of safety that had blanketed its tree-lined streets was punctured. Reporters gathered behind police lines. News vans idled at the curb. Camera lenses glinted red and blue as they reflected the flashing cruiser lights. Anchors declared the homicide one of the most vicious in county memory. For Jeff and Tim, however, the crime refused to become distant headline. By noon, they sat in an interview room at police headquarters, then asked gentle but probing questions about visitors, phone calls, odd vehicles parked outside. Somewhere else in the building, an evidence clerk slid slides of DNA into envelopes marked, "Hold, possible suspect DNA," a foresight that would matter profoundly in another century. Detectives considered her estranged husband, an ex-boyfriend who'd argued with her over child support, and a teenage neighbor rumored to peer through windows. Interviews were frantic, but nothing gelled. The killer appeared to vanish into the very fabric of Lakeland. Meanwhile, two young boys, now motherless, were ushered into relatives' homes as police cars idled outside and reporters knocked on doors. The first day always feels longer than any other, investigators say, because time stretches with unanswered questions. Late that Friday night, veteran detective Jim McDonough stared at Linda's apartment once more. The living room still smelled of last night's fried burger grease. A cartoon Tim had drawn in crayon lay on the sofa bed, smeared when officers had stepped around it. McDonough, a father himself, lingered on the drawing. Two stick figures labeled Mom and Me, holding hands beneath a blazing sun. It hit him then. Every piece of evidence was also a fragment. He vowed, according to colleagues, "We'll nail whoever did this, no matter how long it takes." The promise would echo through generations of detectives, intertwining their fates with the Slatten families. But in September 1981, scientific limits rendered that vow uncertain. DNA profiling was years from mainstream use. Databases for fingerprints were primitive and local. The sneaker tracks matched no shoes seized that day. And the prime witness, the person who could have identified the intruder, was gone. The night passed into early morning, sirens faded, and newspaper presses rolled out headlines that would spark decades of nightmares. Mother found in Lakeland apartment. What no one yet grasped was how long the nightmare would last. Meanwhile, Joseph Clinton Mills, now a married long-haul trucker, lived 25 miles away in Kathleen, Florida, raising a family, coaching youth sports, and attending community fish fries where he chatted easily with sheriff's deputies. His 1984 conviction for forging a will ranked as a misdemeanor footnote. Nobody connected it to a long, dormant homicide. Mills sometimes bumped into Tim at grocery stores and inquired, with saintly concern, whether detectives had finally figured things out. Those encounters, Tim would later testify, felt comforting at the time, and monstrous in retrospect. Yet even as the killer mingled freely, the investigation marched on in smaller, less visible ways. Grants allowed Lakeland PD to digitize cold case files. Evidence technicians transferred Linda's evidence into a climate-controlled freezer, and seminar flyers on familial DNA searches began landing in departmental inboxes. The science was inching closer, but a missing spark remained. That spark arrived on a steamy July morning in 2018, when Detective Tammy Hathcock, newly assigned to cold cases, opened an email from FDLE titled Investigative Genetic Genealogy Pilot. The memo described how law enforcement partners could upload unknown offender DNA to a public database, then enlist genealogists to build family trees that pointed back to suspects, The technique had just nabbed California's Golden State Killer, and FDLE sought volunteers. Hathcock and partner Russell Hurley immediately drove the Slatten extracts to Tallahassee. While they waited for lab conversion, the pair immersed themselves in Grice's mountain of files, highlighting motel receipts, noting interview gaps, flagging the palm print that seemed to belong to no one. They called Jeff and Tim, now in their 40s, and promised a fresh set of eyes. Jeff responded the only way he knew how. "We've heard that before, but we'll never stop hoping." Every tip generated a pulse of adrenaline, followed by the drip disappointment of negative lab reports. Birthdays became season markers for how long justice had stalled. Tim turned 30, then 40. Jeff walked his daughter down the aisle. In family photos, someone always held a "still looking for mom's killer" sign. Initially poster board, later digital overlays on Facebook. If the message felt repetitive, that was the point. Repetition kept the case alive in public memory, even when leads dried up. And although the brothers didn't know it, those social media posts served another purpose. They reminded an aging Joseph Mills that the past had not been buried. Friends later recalled Mills growing tense anytime true crime shows highlighted cold case DNA breakthroughs. "Tech stuff's overrated," he'd mutter, then change the channel to NASCAR. Every evolution in forensic science tightened a net he pretended not to see. Autumn 2018 delivered the first tangible sign that the net existed at all. Genealogy superstar CeCe Moore, contracted by FDLE, called Detective Hathcock. The uploaded Slatten DNA had produced distant cousins, enough for tree building. Moore spent weeks combing obituaries, yearbooks, and hints until 3 branches converged on a last name: Mills. When Hathcock scanned Lakeland archives, she found a police report from September 5, 1981. Interview with Joseph Mills. Phone. States he dropped victim's son at residence 9 p.m. No further contact. The coach had been hiding in plain sight. Hathcock's pulse quickened, yet the revelation demanded proof. The long middle stretch between murder and breakthrough revealed truths larger than any single crime. It showed how grief can mature into activism, how ordinary evidence can outlive generations of detectives, and how scientific thresholds move from impossible to routine in a single career span. Most of all, it underscored the resilience of 2 men who refused to abandon their mother to dusty archives. As Jeff told reporters after the match was confirmed, "Mom stayed 31 years old in our memories, but the world kept innovating for her." That innovation had finally caught up with a killer who once believed midnight shadows could hide a lifetime of secrets. Now, with evidence aligned and handcuffs imminent, the stage was set for a final reckoning. Hathcock's first task was humble: retrieve 2 vials of biological material collected from Linda's, thawed only long enough to be split and refrozen for courier shipment in Virginia. Parabon scientists, led by bioinformatician Ellen Graytock, sequenced the decades-old DNA using whole genome SNP microarrays, a technique that scans hundreds of thousands of markers instead of the short tandem repeats CODIS relies on. The result was a digital data file that could be uploaded to a publicly accessible ancestry site where users consent to law enforcement matching. Within hours, the platform produced a scatter of genetic relatives: a second cousin in North Carolina, a third cousin in Colorado, and clusters of fifth cousins scattered across Georgia and the Carolinas. The closest match shared about 200, distant but workable. That was enough for Parabon's chief genealogist, CeCe Moore, to begin weaving a family tree. Moore approached the project like a historical novelist armed with spreadsheets rather than typewriters. She poured through marriage licenses from the Reconstruction era, mourners' lists, and faded yearbook portraits. Using the same detective instinct that had cracked dozens of cold cases, she mapped descendants of a 19th century couple whose DNA branched into all 3 top matches. Every limb she built branched again, generating a forest of surnames: McCall, Peavy, Harper, and Mills. When Moore overlaid those names onto Polk County address directories from the early 1980s, only one man fit the intersecting criteria of age, sex, proximity, and genetic likelihood: Joseph Clinton Mills, then a 21-year-old Lakeland resident. His name rang faint bells for Hathcock, who located an ancient interview summary in the Slatten file. The note, barely half a page, had gathered dust for 37 years, yet suddenly it read like a neon sign. Moore flagged Mills as a strong candidate, cautioning that a positive ID still required direct DNA comparison. Detectives next needed a lawful path to a fresh biological sample. They trailed Mills in unmarked SUVs across supermarket parking lots and rural trucking depots, each outing choreographed so precisely that Mills never noticed the surveillance. On December 4, 2019, a Wednesday foggy enough to blur street lamps, Mills rolled his household trash bin to the curb at 6:14 a.m. Florida law deems abandoned garbage fair game, so investigators pounced before the waste truck arrived. Inside a bag, beneath coffee filters and fuel receipts, they found a plastic drinking straw contaminated with DNA, plus a cigarette butt flattened into a soda can. FDLE's lab coaxed epithelial cells from the straw and compared them to the 1981 profile. 48 hours later, Hathcock opened an email stamped in red. Match 1 in 700. She printed the certificate and walked it to Hurley, who stared at the paper until tears formed. Somewhere in Lakeland, two brothers who had waited since elementary school to learn a name were about to receive a phone call. But procedure demanded meticulous backchecking before handcuffs appeared. Detectives subpoenaed Mills's palm print card from a 1984 forgery arrest, still archived on microfiche like a ghost in acetate. Digital overlay technicians at FDLE superimposed that palm against the latent print recovered from Linda's windowsill and found 16 ridge characteristics in perfect alignment, well above the 12-point threshold for courtroom certainty. Investigators also re-examined 1981 scene photos using modern enhancement software, revealing a previously unnoticed sneaker tread that matched a brand sold locally in only 2 months of that year. Receipts seized from Mills's mother's attic. She kept them in old cigar boxes, sentimental about her son's first real purchase, showed he'd bought identical sneakers with his summer paycheck 8 weeks before the murder. These converging proofs formed a lattice of evidence as tight as any DNA chain. The detective team assembled a 122-page probable cause affidavit. The state attorney's office signed off. Warrants were cut, SWAT rehearsed a soft entry, and media liaisons drafted press releases deliberately light on sensational language, mindful of the Slatten family's plea to keep coverage respectful. The sound that broke the quiet of December 12, 2019 in Kathleen, Florida, was so ordinary it barely registered. A diesel engine idling curbside, followed by 3 measured knocks on a beige front door. Inside, Joseph Clinton Mills, 58, grizzled from decades of long-haul trucking, slipped out of his recliner, expecting a package or maybe a neighbor returning borrowed hedge clippers. Instead, he opened the door to a tableau lifted straight from network crime dramas. 2 Lakeland detectives in polos, a uniformed deputy, and a videographer from the state attorney's office who pointed a lens not for television but for chain of custody documentation. The lead detective, Tammy Hathcock, spoke first, her voice calm enough to steady the camcorder's autofocus. Mr. Mills, we have a warrant for your arrest in the 1981 homicide of Linda Patterson Slatten. The name, forgotten by most of Polk County, struck Mills like a steel door slamming shut. Mills offered no resistance while deputies secured his wrists. His wife, bewildered, watched the man she had known since 1985 shuffle toward a cruiser as neighbors lifted blinds, recording cell phone clips for social media posts. Back at Lakeland headquarters, the procedural machinery clicked into motion. Mills was photographed, fingerprinted, and seated in interview room 2. Its walls painted a neutral eggshell meant to keep emotions flat. Detectives Hathcock and Russell Hurley entered with a slim black binder, 100+ pages. They started with Miranda. He nodded, lips compressed. For 40 minutes he stonewalled, rocking gently, fingers drumming a syncopation only he understood. Then Hathcock slid across 3 photographs. The latent palm print from Linda's windowsill, Mills's 1984 booking print, and the FDLE overlay glowing neon green. She allowed silence to stretch, a tactic experts teach at cold case symposiums. Let the evidence do the talking. Mills inhaled, eyes watering but never spilling over. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, he murmured. A confession that wasn't yet legally complete but would later be admissible as an admission against interest. Moments later, he asked for a lawyer. Interview ended. Yet the utterance had cracked a door prosecutors would soon fling wide. Charged with first-degree murder and burglary with assault, Mills entered the Polk County Jail while a bailiff affixed the day's booking sheet to a corkboard titled New Intakes. Reporters refreshed the online queue until his mugshot appeared. Silver hair, down-turned mouth, orange jumpsuit. The case leapt from local story to national headline before the afternoon sun finished its arc. True crime podcasts, always hungry for fresh content, recorded emergency episodes. Yet coverage remained surprisingly restrained. No lurid reenactments, no clickbait thumbnails. Thanks in part to a plea the Slatten brothers issued at their first press conference. News of the arrest vaulted through Lakeland within minutes. Jeff and Tim Slatten, notified an hour beforehand to spare them a media blindside, issued a short statement. Our mother's name can finally stand beside the word justice. Detectives, adhering to the brothers' long-standing wish for dignity, shared only essential facts. A DNA match, an arrest, and charges of first-degree murder and burglary. The genealogical triumph reverberated beyond Polk County. C.C. Moore, speaking on a news segment, explained how the case underscored an often misunderstood truth. Forensic genealogy does not hand suspects on a silver platter. It offers direction that must be bolstered by traditional police work. Her spreadsheet-driven family tree yielded a surname, but it was Hathcock's evidence room, the FDLE's print analysts, and an early morning trash pull that secured the prosecution. Moore likened it to handing over a treasure map. Detectives still have to dig. Parabon logged the success in its public database, noting that Mills's identification marked one of the earliest Florida convictions to move from genealogical lead to arrest in under 6 months. Law enforcement agencies nationwide requested copies as a study guide. Behind the headlines, the Slatten brothers experienced emotion that defied hashtags. Jeff, the elder, said the match report felt like a physics experiment folding space-time. Suddenly, 1981 and 2019 were the same day. Tim admitted to alternating waves of anger and fragile relief. He reeled at memories of sharing French fries with Coach Joe after practice, never suspecting he sat across from the man who had destroyed their childhood. Lakeland PD arranged trauma-informed counseling with a specialist in delayed justice grief, while prosecutors scheduled preliminary hearings designed to minimize re-traumatization. One accommodation: the brothers could testify remotely during pretrial motions via closed-circuit feed, sparing them proximity to Mills until absolutely necessary. Court dockets can grind slowly, but early motions proceeded with unusual velocity because the evidence was so robust, and because Mills's own lawyer privately hinted at the possibility of a plea to avoid a death penalty trial whose forensic mountain felt insurmountable. By year's end, the case had shifted from "who did it?" to "how will he plead?" And for the brothers, that pivot was seismic. They had grown accustomed to anniversaries marked by candlelight vigils, billboards, and investigative roadblocks. Now each date carried milestones of progress: discovery deadlines met, lab certifications returned, defense continuances denied. Reflecting on the genealogical breakthrough, Detective Hathcock remarked during a webinar, "This technology is not a magic wand. It's a loudspeaker calling investigators to re-examine cases they thought were silent." For Linda Slatten, the call was answered. Her story no longer whispered in the dusty corners of an evidence room, but spoke loudly in court calendars, law enforcement symposiums, and the relieved voices of 2 sons who had never stopped believing science would catch up to evil. Behind courthouse walls, the defense weighed options. Evidence stacked against Mills formed a latticework difficult to disassemble. A 1 in 700 octillion DNA match from the 1981, a palm print older than compact discs but now digitally verified, and a handful of former Pop Warner parents who recalled Mills querying Tim Slatten about police progress in the early 90s. Florida law is blunt with capital defendants. If prosecutors seek death and the jury votes 8-4 for it. When defense counsel deposed genealogist C.C. Moore and realized her family tree testimony dovetailed seamlessly with FDLE lab reports, they approached the state attorney's office. The brothers gave their blessing to consider a plea. Anything to avoid reliving cross-examination. January 28, 2022, became the fulcrum date. In a closed-door meeting, brothers present, prosecutors, 2 victim advocate counselors, Assistant State Attorney Jaime Wallace summarized the offer. Mills would plead guilty to all 3 counts. Jeff Slaten asked one question: will we ever have to see him at another hearing? Wallace answered no. Parole in Florida is abolished for crimes committed after 1995 and rarely granted for earlier offenses. Jeff looked at Tim. Both nodded, tears migrating but unshed. The plea hearing on February 9, 2022, filled courtroom 3 past capacity. Even retirees who hadn't followed the case in years arrived, drawn by the promise of closure, or at least a punctuation mark. Mills shuffled in wearing shackles. Judges rarely editorialize, yet Abdonay felt compelled. You inserted yourself into these boys' lives under the guise of mentorship. That betrayal magnifies your crime. He then pronounced sentence, tapping the gavel once, a sound that echoed off varnished pews. 4 consecutive terms of life in the Florida Department of Corrections, without the possibility of parole.